Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. This is the COVID-19 Manufacturing Recovery and Preparedness webinar series being put on by Impact Washington, and helping out here today we are with the Port of Bellingham. This is John Michener with the Economic Development Department. I'm a project manager at the Port of Bellingham, and we also are the Regional Economic Partnership for Whatcom County. This is approximately a 45-minute program, and it's going to be conducted live here today. This is Thursday, June 4th, 2020. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our manufacturing community who have generously offered to support our frontline workers in producing much needed PPE and have kept producing essential products. Because of your quick response and contributions, Whatcom County will emerge out of this crisis stronger. We believe that having a plan to repair your facilities to restart and developing your capabilities to operate is essential to getting your employees back to work and meeting the needs of your customers. During this presentation, you will learn about prevention measures and commonly overlooked areas of your facility that you will want to address. Additionally, one of the main reasons we wanted to host Impact Washington is that this presentation will also cover how you can obtain a grant that will pay 100% of the cost to have a consultant help you through the process of improving and rolling out safety measures for your business. You shouldn't have to invent these plans on your own. This is a valuable free resource. On an interesting side note, the research group Blank Rome published several survey results showing that approximately 75% of companies did not have a comprehensive documented plan for covering key areas. 12% of these companies surveyed had received formal complaints from staff. Again, you don't have to do this on your own. People are here to help and programs are here to assist. Also hosting today's call, I am pleased to have online my partners in this effort, Steve Winters, who is our regional account executive from Impact Washington. My compliments to Steve and his team for handling all of the logistics around these meetings. Questions, you can submit those at any time. For those of you on the webinar, you can write the questions and submit it using the space provided. If you're calling in and have access to email, you can go ahead and just email those questions into Steve at swinters@impactwashington.org. Once the panelists conclude, we'll get to the questions and get through as many as we can. Side note too, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Port of Bellingham and Impact Washington websites should you want to share or refer to it again. At this point, I would like to turn the mic over to Steve Winters of Impact Washington, who will walk us through the presentation this morning.
Thank you, John, and good morning, and thank you for joining us. Before I tell you about Impact Washington and why we are doing this, I just want to point out that we are putting these webinars on through the Economic Development Councils and private firms, and are all essentially the same information. So spread the word to your partners, suppliers, clients, if you feel it might be useful to them. So Impact Washington is a 501c3 nonprofit organization offering services and support to the manufacturing community to enhance growth, reduce costs, and provide workforce training, and generally expand manufacturing competency within the state. And this is a strategic initiative by Governor Inslee. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership System was established in 1988 through the Department of Commerce. We are this state's Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and there are 51 of us, one in each state and one in Puerto Rico. We've been around for over 20 years and have helped the Washington manufacturing community with retained jobs, increased revenue, and lower cost. And this is all based on survey information by a third party. We come from the manufacturing world as owners, executives, operations managers, and engineers. We have been directly engaged with production operations, so we've dealt with many of the challenges our clients face and have direct experience. We, along with our large network of resource partners and consultants, are offering support to manufacturers in this time of uncertainty related to COVID-19, providing a no-cost guidance on recovery preparedness for continuing or returning to work. Governor Inslee's office now requires a documented plan for responding to COVID-19 for manufacturers to be in place by May 27th. This plan must be available to your employees for review. Impact Washington is reaching out to the manufacturing community to offer assistance to enable you to continue to or return to work safely and with confidence. A high-level overview of this presentation is we're going to talk about your site compliance, best practices and housekeeping, employee risk assessment, which is very important to classify workers' exposure, and exposure risk matrix for each one of your workstations. The NIST MEP Centers received a grant from the CARES Act for funding this pandemic response. This is to assist manufacturers at this time of uncertainty to continue or resume operations safely. Very importantly, we want to protect your workers. We're also sensitive to the needs and challenges of managers and owners. So we want to provide counsel and advice using a systematic approach. 3 high-level areas for site compliance is we will review your existing procedures. We will conduct an employee risk assessment based on their position and their work site. And then we will help you to implement work with your employees and assist to put workplace controls based on their risk exposure. The first part of the review will consist of a facility tour and developing a facility-wide communication plan for your employees. We want to encourage employees to recognize areas and practices which pose a risk for spreading the virus. And then we want to talk about health screening, best practices, and recommendations. And then we want to create social distancing, which can be done with procedures or with engineering controls that we'll discuss later. And then we want to talk about good health habits, installing signage to remind your employees about good health and safety. Other best practices, we want to talk about things like entrances, hallways, common spaces where employees might tend to congregate. It may be something as simple as removing door closures where possible and keep doors open to allow employees to move from one area to another without having to touch the doorknob. Employee clock in and clock out practices, we want to provide safe places and possibly cleaning between uses, and any common tools, human machine interfaces such as keyboards, buttons should be sanitized between users. And standard tools like brooms, rakes, scrapers, or hand tools should be sanitized after each use. Things like shift changes. Can you implement staggered days, staggered shifts, or shift changes to avoid having employees grouped together? You might want to order Santa cans with sinks to provide outside tables for additional break areas. Some employees working remotely have determined that if they're not using their office, it could be repurposed for segregating lunch and changing areas. Meetings, break rooms, things of that nature, we want to expand and stagger breaks and meal times for groups of employees to reduce the number of employees in a certain area, and then intensify sanitation of refrigerator handles, sinks, microwaves, faucet, things like that. Additional considerations are limiting non-essential visitors from your facility, and this includes employees who could work at home. And then cybersecurity has become a hot topic. The hackers are taking advantage of off-site employees who do not have adequate cybersecurity on their home computer. To help employees determine the appropriate precautions, OSHA has divided job tasks into 4 exposure levels: low, medium, high, and very high. High and very high are generally considered medical staff and first responders. Most manufacturing workers are likely to fall into the medium or lower exposure risk. OSHA looks at 3 code requirements for workplace safety. There's a general duty clause, and the employer has a duty to create a workplace free from risks to the highest possible degree. And then they also talk about bloodborne pathogens. This is written toward healthcare and first responders generally that may have transfer of bodily pathogens through bodily fluids. And then they also talk about personal protection equipment. How can we protect your employees with PPE? When we do the assessment, we want to conduct high-level compliance. Workplace evaluation is based on the exposure risk from specific operations, and there are some engineering controls that could possibly be put in place to minimize that risk. This could be ventilation or barriers or physical layout to minimize contact. You've probably been to the grocery store recently and you see a plexiglass shield between the cashier and the customer. This might be something that we would want to implement in your facility as an engineering control. We might want to look at administrative controls and procedures. How can we separate your employees and provide best practices? And then where appropriate, provide personal protective equipment. This is an example of a risk assessment worksheet that looks at mitigating risk and what engineering or administrative or PPE controls can be put into place to protect your employees' health. If you are interested in an assessment, please contact Impact Washington or the Port of Bellingham. We'll take you through a few initial questions to determine the level of risk that's in your facility, and then we'll schedule a no-cost either half-day to a full-day assessment based on the size of your facility and the number of employees. At the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, Impact Washington was involved with the Department of Commerce, the Governor's Office, and others serving as a matchmaker to identify critical needs and to mobilize manufacturers to produce those goods. Now FEMA has established a PPE Exchange that is simple to use and connects private sector sellers with private sector buyers. Amazon.com has also put up a website to help buyers connect with sellers for PPE. AWB has also developed a website to connect buyers with sellers for providing PPE. So we're finding that the supply of PPE has certainly increased in the last few weeks. And so if there's a need that you have, connect with one of these websites or reach out to us as well. So please reach out to Impact Washington at impactwashington.org or to the Port of Bellingham, and we will set up an assessment that's no cost to you and will help you to comply with these requirements. We're finding that the guidelines and the requirements are changing almost on a weekly basis, sometimes even on a daily basis. And so trying to keep up with the CDC, LNI, and the governor's requirements is a challenge for most companies. Questions?
So at this time, I'm not seeing any questions from the audience.
We've had some questions in the past, which is because things are changing pretty dramatically, one of the questions was, do I have to have a written health and safety plan for COVID-19 response? And the answer is yes. There's some differences between the L&I requirements and the governor's requirements, but just within the last few weeks, the governor has said that companies have to have a documented plan and have to have that available to their employees to review. Some of the other questions we've received are, we're using personal protective equipment, masks and gloves in our facility as a strong recommendation. Are these required for essential business? We're hearing different things, and we require social distancing, but not clear on PPE. That's a good question, and just within the last week, the governor has come out with a requirement that employers have their employees wear cloth masks. It's a requirement. Now, we've had some pushback on that because employers say, hey, we're taking other measures such as engineering controls, we're staggering breaks, we require sanitation of any common device like time clocks. Why do we now have to provide cloth masks? It's a requirement by the governor, and unfortunately, there are some people who feel like I don't want to wear a mask all day, so I'm just not going to comply. The issue with that is if you have an outbreak in your facility and they find a cluster of illnesses, L&I will come to your facility. They're starting to track where the clusters of infections are. The other thing is your employees are now your compliance officers. If they feel unsafe or they are disgruntled for some reason and they turn you in to L&I, you can expect to get a visit from an L&I compliance officer. We've heard stories from different parts of the state where even competitors are turning in their other companies to L&I if they're wanting to try to shut them down. So the best thing to do is try to come into compliance as best you know, have a written documented plan so that if L&I shows up at your door, you can show them all of your housekeeping and sanitation processes. One of the other questions we've received in the past is, our janitor uses disinfectant supplies and understands the requirements for that. Now others want to clean high-touch surfaces. They normally don't use these janitorial supplies. I caution that the employees should read all the directions on the containers, but employees, even as well-meaning as they are, do we draw the line and say that those chemicals can't be used? And one of the suggestions that we made is you should pre-identify cleaning agents and sanitation agents used in the workplace and make them available. And for the most part, unless cleaning their own workstations, gloves are recommended for common area cleaning. Leave the industrial cleaning agents and chemicals to those who are properly trained. One of the other questions we've had from clients is we had an employee that called in sick and they were vomiting, and then they wanted to come back to work the next day. And the employer was questioning, should we allow this employee to come back to work even though they'd been very sick? And they said, well, it was just food poisoning. Our response was, have them get a doctor's note. We're not medical professionals, and we would prefer that a doctor clear them to come back to work after a severe illness. John, any questions on your part?
Yeah, I do, Steve. I was just curious that if somebody is interested in following up with you and Impact Washington to go ahead and get this assessment done and get the documentation and the procedures in place that make sure that they're doing everything safely and correctly and up to date as possible. What would be the time frame on something like that? Do you have any idea what those are looking like these days? If somebody, say, contacted you this afternoon, when could they potentially expect to have folks come out or do the assessment that we're talking about today?
Yeah, good question. We've done over 100 of these assessments across the state, and we have a number of resource partners and consultants who are trained to conduct these assessments. Generally, we can get someone to do the assessment within a week. Sometimes it's even shorter than that. Some of the documentation, putting together a plan, we have a template that we can offer to employers if they're starting from scratch, or we can make suggestions to how to improve their current health and safety plan. But generally within a week, we should be able to address that assessment. Generally takes anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, depending on the size of the facility. We've been doing video tours of facilities since we're still under the governor's stay-at-home order, but we can FaceTime or do a Zoom meeting, walk around your facility, and get an idea of what the workstations look like. And then there's a 25-question survey that we go through that asks detailed questions about your health and safety and sanitation protocol. And then after that, the consultant would write up the report and do about a half hour to an hour out briefing based on the findings and recommendations. But good question, John.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with that one too, Steve. So say a company, their main manufacturing facility, for example, is here in the Whatcom County area, but maybe they have a couple of satellite offices in other parts of the state. And it sounds like that with the services Impact Washington's providing here, that you could do these assessments in all of their locations here in the state. It's not just the headquarters, but you'd be able to do these wherever they're located. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got consultants throughout the state, and because these are being done remotely, someone living in Eastern Washington can certainly do an assessment here in the Whatcom County area. We've even gotten some inquiries from people out of state that have watched the webinars, and because we're part of the MEP National Network, we can put those employers in touch with the MEP in their state. And all of the MEPs are conducting these same assessment through the same types of guidelines. And so if there's anybody within the state or even outside of the state, we can certainly take care of providing the information that they need.
That's great, because that actually you headed me off at the pass there. That was my other question, would be outside of the state, and that's fantastic. Those services are provided. I'm not seeing any other questions popping up on the screen right now. I did want to just quickly say to the audience out there that we've worked with Impact Washington for quite some time now, for years, and it's a top-notch organization. And just real briefly, Steve, I was going to say, in addition to the COVID-19 things you're working on now, you guys do provide other services, and the end result of all these is to help businesses be more successful and more efficient as they move forward. Can you just real briefly discuss maybe some of the other services you guys can provide down the road?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, John, for bringing that up. About 75% of the training we do is lean manufacturing, continuous improvement. So we're kind of known as the lean guys within the state, but we also provide programs through the community colleges. We'll put together a package of training for your employees that might include Microsoft Excel, leadership and supervisory training, lean manufacturing. We also help companies with quality management systems. This is a big aerospace hub, and so we do help companies get ISO 9001 certification, AS 9100 certification. If you're a Boeing supplier, there's a lot more emphasis with not just getting ISO 9001, but also to get AS 9100, even if you're a tier 3 or 4 supplier. We help companies with strategic planning. There's so many companies we run into, and we ask the question, well, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And they say, well, we want to grow the company. Okay, how do you want to grow the company? Do you want to grow revenue? Do you want to grow net income? Do you want to grow the number of employees? So we will help companies with strategic planning and help them get to where they are, from where they are to where they want to be in the next few years. We also help companies with succession planning. Many times a company gets started and the owner of the company has gotten up in age and they really don't have a succession plan. Where's the company going to go if the owner were to pass away? So we help companies do strategic planning as well as succession planning. We also help food companies, food processors. We've got a food scientist on staff that helps with the CPQI training and certification. So a variety of different service offerings. One of the things I mentioned earlier was cybersecurity, and we're finding that's a huge issue now with employees working remotely, that the hackers have started utilizing this breaks in the cybersecurity to take advantage of people working at home. So we can help companies with cybersecurity as well. As a matter of fact, if a company would have a need, we say just reach out, because we may not have the answer directly, but we're well connected with, for instance, the Port of Bellingham, other economic development centers. We're also well connected with the community and technical college system in the state, and with the governor's office, the Department of Commerce. So generally, if companies have a question, we can generally find an answer.
That is great, great stuff. So again, see no questions on the screen here. I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up here for this morning. And if anybody listening have questions that didn't get answered, or something comes up down the road that you would like answered, please don't hesitate to reach out to either the Port of Bellingham or the folks here at Impact Washington themselves. It's a great resource, and I highly encourage folks to get in touch, especially due to the situation we're in today, and make sure your employees are safe and your operations running smoothly, and doing all we can to protect from COVID-19 and get back to work as quickly as we can, because that's what we do best. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you again to Impact Washington for putting this on. We really appreciate it and look forward to continued partnerships to come. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks much.